What's up guys, Houndish here, and today we're going to talk about Edge of Fate. I kind of wanted to discuss the conversation about all of the system changes, how some folks are referencing these as Destiny 3 levels of system changes, which certainly might not be far out, but also I think Bungie have some opportunities to claw back a bit more positive sentiment with regards to some of the stuff that they're doing over the next year or so, because while I may be wrong, I'm not a game developer, I do feel like some of the areas of concern for players can actually be improved or fixed before they really become a major issue. And so with Bungie's significant rework of the core investment parts of Destiny 2, there's been a lot of community folks and creators refer to the system reworks like Armor 3.0, the stat reboot, gear tiering, and the new power system, even the portal, as Destiny 3 levels of gameplay rework, and in a lot of ways, that seems to make sense, but there are folks who are frustrated by the community response at large, the anxiety at the moment, at the amount of grind, and there'll be folks who highlight that if we did get a Destiny 3, we'd see a big refresh like this, and I think most of us probably don't have an issue with that concept. So the question is, why isn't it being received so well in relation to Edge of Fate? Well, I think for me, and probably a lot of players, the difference is that this is not Destiny 3, right? Not only that, but we aren't seeing these changes alongside a massive Witch Queen or Final Shape level expansion, and they're instead coming with something much smaller, which Bungie have described as being akin to a Rise of Iron level drop, and that means that while there is new content this year, and hopefully a decent amount of it, Bungie is still hoping to channel us into a lot of Destiny 2's existing content. And of course, we see that firsthand via the portal, which Bungie have shown off, and that's why, for me, the Destiny 3 argument doesn't really make sense. We are getting a big refresh, but I think the general vibe is that we're simply going again, or playing a slightly different version of these systems, all from the beginning, more or less. But the content itself is largely the same Destiny game that we've been playing for years. Of course, the caveat here is that there is a lot of stuff coming in Edge of Fate, presumably, at least, which we haven't seen yet, right? A minimal amount of new content there really has been revealed. And maybe that kind of is part of the problem, because players are missing out on that hype component. Either way, it kind of boils us down to the core reason that a lot of players seem to take issue with the way these changes are being implemented. And I totally get that. It's also probably worth considering that Bungie may have been working quietly on these changes for some time. I don't doubt that the general concepts for things like Armor 3.0 or reward tiers may have been in the oven since before the Final Shape even. However, given that Destiny's dev team has shrunk, and with other major releases being a focus, it's taken Bungie longer than is ideal to get these systems up and running, and they're ultimately arriving at a less than perfect time in the game's life cycle. However, I do think that Bungie have an opportunity as we approach Edge of Fate to perhaps try and claw back some more positive sentiment, and possibly to fix what will become some of the longer term issues with their current plans. I think we're kind of in a situation where the negatives at the moment are outweighing the positives, right? When we look at Armor 3.0, for me personally, it's hard to argue against it looking at the armor system holistically, right? There'll probably be some issues that players find with new stats or perks, and kind of growing pains that hopefully Bungie can tweak relatively quickly, but hopefully overall the new armor setup will actually make armor important again, because things have been pretty stale with many of us running the same sets for months or even years at this point. And obviously in a loot game that is not a good situation to be in. Additionally, weapons overall are seeing some pretty good introductions as far as we can tell. If we forget about the specifics of weapon tiers, on the most part weapons look like they'll probably be better than what we have now, with more enhancements to perks, origin traits, mods and all of that. Plus we are getting new archetypes and some potentially interesting exotics. Other systems, like the portal, while it may look kind of boring, obviously are designed hopefully to guide players into suitable content and help to feature rewards in a way that doesn't necessarily change that much of the director and access to other activities. So many of the system changes are probably objectively positive, but the big problem that comes into play is the desire to grind in this community 10 years in, right? It's a big challenge for Bungie, and they seem to have failed to recognize that. Some of the big components of that issue, looking at the new gear system, include the bonuses that Bungie plan to give us when using newly introduced gear. This might be fun at first, but it means that for every major content drop, we'll be weaker unless we get new armor for that season, as well as new weapons. And alongside that, we'll still need to get close to the new power caps every DLC to actually get the best rewards, when we look at things like tier 5 armor and weapons. So this leaves players feeling like we're going into the era of even more redundancy. We work hard to earn tier 5 loot, then the next DLC drops, that loot becomes weaker because it loses loads of seasonal bonuses, items. And then before we can get a new set of temporarily top tier loot, we'll have to repeat that same power grind, and it goes on and on and on. A big part of the reason for that is that Bungie are doing these seasonal power refreshes, seasonal bonuses that affect the new gear in the game but then ultimately go away, and also a loot tiering system that seems to be tied heavily to your current power level. And as I've mentioned before, I think those will turn out to be the real issues with these systems. However, Bungie can potentially remove some of that FOMO-inducing element before any further damage is done. I'm going to play the role of armchair developer here. I already hate myself, but genuinely, I believe the worst parts of this can be resolved relatively easily. So for my opinion on these systems now, the first thing that could be done is to remove the seasonal artifact perks from gear. Right now, the plan is for new gear to benefit from damage reduction and outgoing damage boosts. If these buffs are unlinked from gear specifically, and instead were applied to our character overall, then I think it will do far less of a job of making previously earned gear feel redundant, right? It won't solve all of the new grind when Edge of Fate drops, but it will at least respect that grind when the next season actually begins. The next thing, which I think sucks, is that the tier system for weapons and armor will be tied specifically to our power level at any given time. So, of course, some of this would happen organically anyway, because if your power is too low, you won't be able to reliably run Grandmaster content, for instance. However, I think that if any player is capable of completing a GM or a raid or going flawless in trials, then they should be rewarded for their gameplay accomplishment, right? Instead, looking at this kind of power to gear tier system, it looks like it may instead kind of handicap players because they haven't engaged for enough hours to accrue a specific number. In my opinion, skill should be at least equal to investment, especially after 10 years, because there are loads of skilled players who actually play the game less now because they have lives or other interests. And so I think not playing enough in a given season, causing you to get lower tier potential loot, is a straight up bad mechanic, and Bungie should seriously consider undoing that. Now theoretically, the last two things I've mentioned could be relatively easy fixes, not least in terms of seasonal bonuses, because they still have months to rethink that mechanic before it will truly become a problem. Again, of course I'm not a game dev, but these decisions seem reasonably reversible without major amounts of development. I might be wrong on that though. The seasonal power resets would still be annoying to see, but I do genuinely think that if Bungie decouple seasonal bonuses and tiers from this strong link to current power level, there'll be a lot less concern about sort of engagement farming, which is how a lot of people in the community are referring to Bungie's goals with these systems. Other elements that I think could be improved, of course there'll be a new currency called Unstable Cores, which are needed to infuse gear into what Bungie are calling the seasonal power range. Bungie have said that these will expire at the end of the season. My question, again, would be that if it isn't about trying to create as much engagement as possible, then why not remove that expiration point, right? Small systems like this create a lot of feels for players. It might turn out to not be a big deal, but my ask of Bungie would be simply, don't let this become a new fiasco, right? Just have a go at fixing these things before the problem gets worse. Beyond those components though, other elements may indeed be more development heavy, like the possibility for Bungie to create ways for us to upgrade existing weapons, armor, and exotics. Bungie actually haven't been crystal clear on how much, if any, of our existing loot might be upgradable. We know that we should be able to infuse things to new levels, but there's not a lot of clarity on how exotic armor upgrades will work, or if there could be other upgrade options available for gear. One thing which I think Bungie could have done to calm players' concerns would be to allow us to upgrade our current weapons into the new system. At this point in development, I'm sure that's probably a big ask, but given that Bungie haven't said much about crafting, imagine if the new Arms Week event featured a mechanic where we could earn the ability to upgrade our stuff via the crafting table. I think if FOMO wasn't a focus, then I wouldn't see why Bungie wouldn't allow that. And overall, this is part of the reason that players feel a bit let down by what we've heard about the new system so far. A bunch of folks at Bungie have actually developed some really solid loot systems with these changes, but at the same time, it seems clear that higher powers have also rained down a lot of demands with regards to getting players to engage for as many hours as possible, which is why season resets, power refreshes, losing perks, losing upgrade materials, and even the tiering system are a thing. And I think the difficulty, as we've discussed, is that not only is the game 10 years old, but the new content drops are going to be smaller, and many aspects of the overall design that we're seeing here seem to forget that issue entirely, which is going to cause a problem. So that's my opinion. New weapons that are better than before is a good thing. New armor that's better than before is a good thing. Having a degree of power grind is not unexpected for Destiny, but tying the quality of loot that you get to the power grind is a bad move. Making gear that we've spent a long time farming for, like tier 5 weapons, less viable after a new season begins is probably a bad move. And if we end up with no options to upgrade any of our existing stuff, again, I think it's probably not a good thing, because it damages that longer term sense of progression, and it also damages player desire to continue to grind, right? Because there's a sense that we're going onto a treadmill where everything we do will be relevant for a period of time, but then ultimately will be forgotten about. So it's those systems that I think are really going to cause the majority of problems when Edge of Fate rolls around. You guys might have a different opinion, so share your thoughts down below. As we highlighted though, there are a number of things that Bungie can change about this plan without having to move mountains, presumably, that would actually make those more impactful elements of it, like Armor 3.0 having set bonuses and the big improvements that we'll actually see to gear, come to the forefront, as opposed to players just worrying about how much grind there will be, how long it will be relevant for, and the fact that ultimately it'll be the continuation of rinse and repeat, but with more potential redundancy for the time we've invested into the game. So I'm hoping Bungie will tackle that issue head on and have that conversation with players sooner rather than later. Otherwise, we may be doomed to just continue down this path where sentiment worsens and worsens without any real response from Bungie. So give me your thoughts. If you found the video interesting, a rating below very much helps us out. And if you do want to be kept up to date with all of Bungie's updates and details for Edge of Fate, then keep it locked and loaded here on the channel. Otherwise, cheers for watching, and I hope you guys have an awesome day.